She posted it at 11:47 p.m. on March 31st. I was in a hotel room in Lisbon, finishing a deployment review, when my phone lit up. Notifications stacking over each other. My name tagged more times than I'd ever seen. The preview showed just the first line. I set down my coffee, opened Instagram, and read the whole thing twice without moving. Then I opened my laptop, navigated to a folder I'd been building quietly for 4 months, and started reviewing the timestamps. I wasn't angry. That's the part people never quite believe. By then, I was something past anger, something quieter and far more certain. I had known this moment was coming. What I hadn't known was the exact form it would take, or how little it would hurt when it finally arrived. That absence of pain wasn't numbness. It was the feeling of a system completing exactly as designed. I had built something over 4 months precisely for this moment, and here it was exactly where it was always going to end. I closed the app, took a long breath, and opened the folder one final time. Not to add anything, just to read what was already there and confirm that I was ready. I met Harlow at a brand activation event 4 years before any of this. I was contracted to handle the back-end infrastructure, camera feeds, real-time analytics, the invisible technical layer that nobody thinks about until it breaks. She was the featured influencer, the face of the thing. I noticed her because she was the only person in the room not performing when the cameras weren't on her. Between takes, she'd sit cross-legged on an equipment case, eating a granola bar, reading her phone with complete disinterest in everyone around her. I thought that was the real version of her, the version that existed when no one was watching. We talked during a setup delay. She asked what I actually did, not in the polite surface-level way, but with what felt like genuine curiosity. I explained back-end systems. She said it sounded like architecture for things people never see, but would fall apart without. I thought that was a remarkably precise way to describe it. I thought she was someone worth knowing. We got married 14 months after we met. We'd agreed early on that children would wait, until my work stopped pulling me across time zones and started letting me stay in one place long enough to mean it. And for the first year and a half, we were genuinely good. I want to give that period its full weight, because it's easy, after everything, to retroactively hollow it out. But I won't do that. On Sunday evenings when I was home, we'd cook together. She had a rule about phones at the table that she extended even to herself, which meant something given what she did for a living. She'd show me brand pitch decks and ask for my opinion in a way that seemed like she actually wanted it, not just confirmation. I'd walk her through whatever architecture problem I was wrestling with, and she'd listen, really listen, and ask questions that proved she'd retained the last thing I'd explained. One night after a deployment failure that cost a client hours of downtime, I came home still carrying it. Short, distracted, not good company. She didn't ask me to explain it. She just adjusted to it. Gave me space without withdrawing, stayed close without pressing. At some point, she went to the kitchen, came back with 2 cups of tea, set one beside me without interrupting, and went to read on the sofa. I remember looking over at her in the lamplight and thinking, this is the person I want to be in a room with for the rest of my life. I still think about that evening more than I'd like to admit. Within 6 months of meeting her, I understood why people fell for Harlow. She had a way of making whoever she was with feel like the only person she was paying attention to. She listened carefully. She remembered small things. She turned the full weight of her focus on you, and it felt like standing in sunlight. Looking back, I understand now that the version of Harlow I married was a version she'd built for an audience of one. I was that audience. The distance started with my work, and I want to be honest about this, because the way she later framed it was partly rooted in something real. I was a remote consultant on rotating contracts. Singapore, Amsterdam, Cape Town. When I was home, we were good. But home was increasingly the exception. We had a rhythm, though. Video calls most evenings. Short clips throughout the day. Something she'd seen, something that made her laugh. I saved most of them. That habit, as it turned out, became quietly important. I believe the first year and a half was real. Whatever came after, I don't think the beginning was manufactured. I think she started with something true, made a series of choices that led her somewhere she hadn't planned, and then chose to protect herself rather than tell the truth. That's not an excuse. It's just the version I've come to believe. The first thing I noticed was a change in her latency. I know that sounds clinical, but I work in systems, and I was attuned to the rhythm of ours. Our calls had a pattern: duration, time of day, the way the conversation moved. Around October, 8 months into that year's travel rotation, something in the pattern compressed. Calls got slightly shorter, a quicker wrap-up. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say there, just slightly off. I told myself she was busier. Her following had grown significantly that quarter. A skincare collaboration had pushed her numbers up, and with that came more obligations. I wasn't wrong about that part. She was busier. That was real. But something else was also real, and I was only just beginning to sense it. She started canceling visits. We'd had a standing arrangement. It had worked well for almost a year. Whenever I was away for more than 2 or 3 weeks, she'd fly out to me. Between October and February, 3 planned trips fell apart. Each time the reason was plausible. A brand event that moved. A collaboration deadline. Once, she felt run down. I rescheduled each time without complaint. The 4th cancellation came in February. The evening before her flight, she called to say a last-minute Valentine's shoot had come up. She sounded genuinely apologetic. I said I understood. I had already made arrangements on my end, moved a client call, booked a place I knew she'd like, even planned out the day in a way I don't usually do. Not anything elaborate, just deliberate. The kind of effort you make when you're trying to protect something that matters. I didn't mention any of that on the call. It didn't feel like information that would change the outcome. After we hung up, I sat with a feeling I didn't yet have a name for. Not suspicion, exactly. More like the sensation of hearing a note played slightly off-key in a song I knew very well. Not wrong enough to stop the music, but wrong enough that I couldn't unhear it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was reading into things. I told myself that twice a day for a week. Then Valentine's Day came. I'd already cleared the entire day for her. Reservations made, time blocked out, nothing else scheduled. When she canceled, there was nothing to replace it with. And I couldn't call. She said she'd be on set all day. So I kept the day as it was. Stayed in. I opened the clips she'd sent over the past few months and let them run one after the other. Something that made the day feel like it still belonged to something real. That's when I found it. The clip. The clip was from November. A video she'd sent while I was in Amsterdam. 30 seconds. She was in the apartment kitchen, making tea, narrating something mundane about a brand meeting. She'd sent it with the caption, "Miss your face." On the second watch, I noticed something I hadn't seen the first time. Not in the frame directly, but in the microwave door behind her. A reflection. Faint. Distorted by the curvature of the glass and the angle of the light. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for anything. A shape. Movement. The outline of someone standing just out of frame. Bare torso. Light fabric at the waist. Boxers, maybe. It wasn't clear enough to point to and say it definitively. Not clean, not sharp. But it was there. And once I saw it, I couldn't not see it. I turned the brightness up, replayed it, slowed it down, watched the same 3 seconds until the image stopped changing and the conclusion didn't. I set the phone down. I remember looking out at the Amsterdam Canal below, the orange lamplight on the water, and feeling something I can only describe as the moment before a diagnosis. That interval where you already know what the doctor is about to say, where part of you is still deciding whether to listen. The reflection was subtle, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away if I wanted to, but it carried the same quiet certainty as something fully seen, not enough to prove, enough to know. I picked the phone up and saved the clip to a folder I hadn't yet created but would. I named it nothing, just a date. I didn't call her, I didn't ask. I lay in the dark of that hotel room for a long time, and for the first time I felt something I'd been outrunning for weeks. The specific grief of a truth you already know, but can't yet say aloud. The kind that doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in slowly, from every direction at once, until you realize you've been inside it longer than you knew. I thought about the message I could send. The one with the clip attached. I'd been composing it in my head without realizing it. I deleted it without sending. Not yet. Not like this. The truth wasn't just in the evidence, it was in when the evidence was shown. I should explain the decision not to confront immediately, because it's the part people question most. By the time I saw the reflection, I already knew what it meant. Not in a way I could prove, not in a way I could present, but in the way you recognize a pattern before you can articulate it. If I called Harlow that night and said I saw someone in the reflection, one of two things would happen. She'd explain it away, angle, lighting, distortion, and I'd be left arguing over something I couldn't isolate cleanly. Or she'd understand that I was paying attention, and whatever was happening would move further out of reach. Neither outcome served me. So I didn't call. I waited, and I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. The clip wasn't evidence. It was a signal. I needed the record. As the person managing our shared accounts and cloud infrastructure, I already had access to more information than I'd ever needed to use. Timestamp logs, call records, device metadata, systems we'd set up for convenience and never revisited. I started revisiting them. At first, there was nothing obvious. Just fragments, small inconsistencies that didn't hold on their own. Then the pattern began to stabilize. Late-night activity on evenings, our calls had been shorter than usual, gaps where there hadn't been a call at all. Data usage that didn't match the version of her day I'd been given. I pulled the access logs from the apartment system, something we'd installed for security and energy management, and then ignored. There was a secondary key fob, 17 entries since October. All in the evening. All on days where something in our rhythm had been slightly off. The overlap wasn't approximate, it was exact. I requested archived carrier records within my rights as the account holder. Cross-referenced them against metadata from 6 posts she'd made during the same period. The geolocation data embedded in the files didn't match where she said she'd been. Individually, each piece could be explained. Together, they couldn't. By late February, I wasn't looking for confirmation anymore. I had it. What I was building now was structure. A version of events that didn't rely on interpretation. Something that would hold under scrutiny. Something that didn't need me to argue for it. In the same week, I contacted a solicitor, one quiet consultation, lease separation, joint account dissolution, penalties, timelines, legal standing. I took notes, I said nothing. And through all of it, I maintained exactly the same relational temperature on the surface. I called at the same times, responded the same way, kept the rhythm intact. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was the hardest part. Not building the record. Building it while continuing to be present, answering when she called, listening to her move through the details of her day, carrying what I knew the way you carry something fragile through a crowded room, carefully, without letting it show. There was one evening in March when she called in a particularly warm mood. Something about a shoot that had gone wrong in a way that was apparently funny in retrospect. I listened. I laughed where it was natural to laugh. I said the things I would have said if I didn't know what I knew. After the call ended, I sat for a long time without moving. The message was already there. It had been there for weeks. I could have sent it. I didn't. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, went to bed. By then, I understood something I hadn't at the beginning. The truth wasn't just something you had. It was something you deployed. And I wasn't ready to deploy it. Not yet. Harlow had survived 3 public controversies before I knew her. The first was a brand dispute in her second year as an influencer. A supplement company claimed she'd promoted a competitor while still under contract. She got ahead of it by posting a long, candid video about the dark side of brand deals, turning the story from breach of contract into creator advocacy. Her following grew by 40,000 that week. The second was a call-out from another creator over a product collaboration that allegedly copied their concept. Harlow posted a teary response about creative community, tagged the other creator with grace and warmth, and the conversation shifted from accusation to dialogue within 48 hours. The other creator eventually apologized. The third was the most serious, a content theft allegation that had nearly cost her a 6-figure partnership. She managed it in 4 days. By the time the brand's legal team had even reviewed the claim, Harlow had already reframed the narrative as a misunderstanding between two creators who had clearly drawn from the same cultural moment. I understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't someone who panicked under pressure. This was someone who had, over years, developed an almost clinical instinct for narrative control. She moved fast, she deployed vulnerability as a tool, and she had learned that the person who speaks first holds the shape of the story. By mid-March, my questions had become more precise. Time, place, sequence. Small details asked once and left there. I didn't repeat them. I didn't follow up. But for the first time, there was a difference between asking and confirming. And she could feel it. There were moments when she corrected herself mid-sentence. Minor details. Nothing I had challenged. I let them pass without comment. I think that unsettled her more than anything I could have said. There were a few moments, small, precise, where I referenced evenings too accurately for it to feel like coincidence. And at some point, she started to suspect the secondary key fob wasn't as invisible as she thought it was, and that I might not be as unaware as I appeared. None of this was explicit. That was the point. It wasn't confrontation. It was pressure. Subtle, but directional. And for someone used to controlling the narrative, even the suggestion of losing that control is enough. She believed I'm certain that April 1st would follow the same arc. Post the accusation. Ride the sympathy wave. Control the frame before any counter-narrative could form. The April Fool's framing was precise. It gave her plausible deniability in both directions. If I responded quietly, it was a prank. If the story spread, she had the emotional testimony to sustain it. She was, by her own history, very good at this. What she hadn't calculated was that I had been building the counter-narrative for 4 months. That I had waited, deliberately, for her to move first. Because I understood something about the structure of her advantage. It required a story without a counter. It required the audience to have only one version to hold. I had the other version, documented, time-stamped, complete, and I had been waiting for the moment she committed to hers fully enough that it couldn't be withdrawn. She gave me that moment at 11:47 p.m. on March 31st. I posted at 7:14 a.m. on April 1st. I understood, somewhere in the construction of all this, that I was also constructing something, shaping a record, choosing what to include, deciding when to release it, and how. I didn't examine that thought for long. I'm not sure I was ready to. But it was there. A note I heard and let pass, and honesty, if it's worth anything, probably requires me to leave it here. Her post was framed, from the opening line, as an April Fool's reveal. Performative vulnerability, the exact register her audience had come to trust. It told a story, months of struggle, an absent partner, emotional distance, and then the turn. She had found evidence, she said, of unfaithfulness on my part. She was speaking out today because it felt fitting. Expose a joke of a relationship on the day built around deception. She named no names. She didn't need to. By 3 a.m., the comments were in the thousands. By morning, the post had reached the kind of momentum only her content ever achieved. The kind that feels like consensus before anyone has paused to verify a single thing. I read the entire post twice. I identified 6 specific claims. I opened the encrypted folder and confirmed, one by one, that I had a timestamp piece of evidence addressing each of them. Then I made a coffee from the in-room machine, sat down at the desk, and typed one sentence. Since today is about truth disguised as jokes, here's a joke disguised as truth. Then I attached the document, the full chronological record, 17 key fob entries from the apartment logs, the November clip, with the reflection isolated and time-stamped. Carrier records organized in a clean sequence. 6 metadata discrepancies mapped against where she said she'd been. No commentary, no emotional language, no accusations, just dates, and what happened on them. I set my phone face down on the desk and got busy with work, finishing what I'd started and then moving on to the next task without interruption. For 6 hours, I didn't touch it. I didn't see any of it in real time. What I know about those 6 hours came later, from people who had watched it unfold as it happened. The first wave arrived still laughing. April Fools, obviously. A couple playing along, the husband responding in kind. The audience that had already aligned behind Harlow stayed briefly defensive. dismissing the document as fabricated, excessive, exactly what a guilty person would produce. Some shared her original post again, doubling down on a version of events that still felt intact. Then the second wave arrived, the people who actually read what I'd posted. The entries were specific. Dates, times, a registered key fob identifier tied to the apartment system she had authorized herself, not interpretation, not narrative, just records. Within hours, people began checking. The metadata discrepancies held under independent review, the carrier records aligned with the gaps, and the November clip, once processed, showed what it had always shown. Not clearly, not cleanly, but enough. The reflection. Frame by frame, slowed down, isolated. Not enough to prove in isolation. Enough in context to confirm. The tone in the comment sections began to shift. Not all at once. It never does. Some stayed where they were, some went quiet, others began deleting what they'd said earlier without explanation. The change moved unevenly at first, then faster, then all at once. A tide, slow at the edges, decisive in the middle. By mid-morning, something else started circulating. Images, taken from across the building, angled, slightly obscured, but clear enough. A man exiting the apartment that morning, bareheaded, unhurried, familiar with the space and the way people are when they've been there more than once. No caption attached, none was needed. They moved quickly, shared, reposted, compared against the timeline I'd already given. That was the point where the remaining doubt stopped holding. She posted 3 times in response. The first stayed in the April Fool's register. Light, dismissive, calling my post the saddest performance she'd ever seen. The second was longer, more deliberate. A claim that the evidence had been constructed, that I had the technical ability to fabricate what I'd presented, that this was exactly what someone guilty would do. The third was written at 11:48 a.m. A full retraction, different tone, stripped of performance. Something closer to what people sound like when the structure they've been relying on gives way. I never saw it live. Someone sent me a screenshot. She deleted it after posting. By noon, the comment sections had turned. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough. I didn't post again. I didn't respond to a single reply. I had given the record once, clearly, with timestamps, without interpretation. Then I stopped and let it do what it would do on its own. This was intentional. Her advantage had always been narrative control. If I kept speaking, it would become a conversation. And in a conversation, she had leverage. Tone, framing, timing. In silence, she had none of that. Only the record. Only what could be checked. She was very good at controlling stories. She just needed participation. I declined. The financial separation took 11 days. The joint savings account dissolved in 4 email exchanges through the solicitor's office. Clean, undisputed. The lease was more complex, 8 months into a 12-month renewal. The early termination penalty was significant. I absorbed it entirely, without negotiation. The fastest exit was through me taking the cost, and I'd already set aside the amount. I arranged for my remaining possessions to be collected while I was still in Lisbon. The divorce process started on April 9th. Formal filing, representation assigned, no contest from her side. These things don't conclude quickly. There are timelines that exist independent of emotion, statutory waiting periods, procedural steps, documents that move at their own pace. Ours followed that structure. What mattered was that it was underway, irreversible. There's something I left out of most of this account, because honesty, if it avoids the uncomfortable parts, is just a cleaner version of the same performance. I missed her. Not in the months of building the record. By then, the emotional temperature had already shifted. But earlier, in the autumn, in the weeks when I was still telling myself I'd misread, still constructing explanations that allowed things to remain intact, I missed her. The woman on the equipment case with the granola bar and no interest in being observed. The Sunday evenings. The cup of tea placed beside my laptop without a word. I don't know if that version of her existed independent of an audience. I've stopped trying to resolve that. What I know is that I love that version with a completeness I haven't experienced before or since, and that the love didn't end when I found the evidence. It ended in stages. Each new piece converting something emotional into something structural. Less feeling, more understanding. There were messages I wrote and didn't send. I kept count toward the end. 12. The longest was 300 words. The shortest was just her name. I deleted them all. On April 14th, the day the lease termination was confirmed, I was in a cafe in Porto. I read the email, replied to acknowledge it, ordered another coffee. Nothing about it felt significant in the moment. That's how most endings actually happen, without ceremony. Weeks later, the legal process continued in the background. Documents moved, dates were assigned. Things progressed the way they always do, quietly, formally, without urgency. By the time it was finalized, there was nothing left to resolve. That evening, in Porto, I went through my phone's contact list. Her name was still there, not because I needed it, because I hadn't removed it yet. I looked at it for a moment, then I deleted it. Confirmed. The way you remove something that no longer serves a function. The apartment I left behind, the high ceilings, the kitchen that photographed well the life we had constructed inside it, was now irrelevant to me. I had taken the penalty, left it exactly as it was, like a set after production ends. I walked to a restaurant around the corner, ordered something I hadn't tried before, ate slowly, no phone on the table. The last thing I'll say, and then I'm done, is about the man in the clip. I never named him, not in the document, not in any communication, not here. He was a variable introduced into a system I chose to understand. He required no further attention. If there's anything to take from this, it's this. The people who wrong you are rarely as powerful as the situation makes them seem. Their leverage depends on your reaction. Your outrage, your need to respond, your urgency to correct the story. Remove that, and most of what they rely on disappears. Build the record. Wait. And when the moment comes, use it once. If you prefer truth without noise, subscribe.